Hey Emma,
Yes, Madelyn.
what do you say when the bounty hunter finds you and he says he can bring you in either dead or alive, but you're kind of nervous and the things are just coming out?
I don't know. What do you say?
Live! Ah! Live! Hello and welcome to Talk This.
It's dangerous to podcast alone.
I'm your walking through the left door host, Madelyn.
I'm your walking through the right door host, Emma.
And thanks for tuning in to this week's Thanksgiving show. This week, we're thankful for Live Alive and the Stanley Parable Ultra Deluxe Edition.
Yes.
And as a result of being thankful for them, we're going to talk about them on the show.
Yeah. We were thankful for them 4 days ago now because it's live on noon on Sunday.
Live.
Live Alive, yeah.
So I'll jump into Live Alive here. I can't believe that that's how you pronounce it. I acknowledge that you did the research.
I wasn't really going to look it up because I know it's Live Alive, but I was watching like a old Did You Know Gaming about like the original release of Live Alive, like 4 years old, and it was very funny. They put the title on the screen and were like, there's no official word on how to pronounce this, and in the graphic they were showing on the screen there was the katakana right underneath Raibu Alaibu. Nobody knows how to pronounce it. It's not right there.
Like, oh, I know. Doesn't everybody know how to read Japanese? Don't you know your katakana?
I just mean if you saw that and were like, maybe that's how to I guess those are just random symbols underneath that I shouldn't pay any attention to.
Those wild people at Square putting weird little glyphs.
Anyway, the video settled on Live Alive.
That's what I settled on.
Yeah, but it's wrong.
Okay. So first of all, listeners, Live Alive, originally a 1994 game from Square for the Super Famicom, but more recently in the news as a Western release remake for Switch in July. Why is it called Live Alive, Emma? What is the meaning of that title?
I did not look into the meaning of that title.
I could not really find much. I
don't know why it's called that.
Live Alive makes a lot more sense.
That doesn't make any more sense, actually.
Well, if you think of it as live and alive, it's
okay, but what does that have to do with the game?
Well, nothing. But it's at least a phrase that I could say, okay, that makes sense. But the A is what's very perplexing in the middle there. Live, alive.
It's also stylized with the second live is backwards, right? So
the real title is Live A Evil.
That might be it. That might be the that's why it's called that, maybe.
Is it just because A is a symmetrical letter? They were like, nobody can read English. This is just glyphs.
Yeah. I do think sometimes that is the case with English titles in Japan. The same way we'll put, like, random kanji characters on sweatshirts, you know?
Okay, fine. So it's that it's a, oh boy, I just a moment ago had the word for this. A palindrome. Is that thematically relevant?
I just think the evil part is sticking out to me. That's all.
Great. So Live Alive, like I said, 1994 game from Square. Also released for the Wii U in 2015, but only in Japan. It is only this July that for the first time this game was released in the West. And
yeah, it was on the virtual console for Wii U. So it wasn't like done anything to it. It was just available through the Wii U.
Fair enough. And Emma talked about Live Alive a bit. How many side quests ago? I mean, it was not last week, but I can't remember.
In August.
So not last week, but 2 side quests before that. 2 save data side quests before that.
Yeah.
What inspired you to play Live Alive?
It's a classic. It was a very big deal when they announced it to come over to the West. It's for not really being a very successful release at first, it is a very influential game.
Yeah, Live Alive was the directorial debut of Takashi Tokita, perhaps better known for Chrono Trigger and for Parasite Eve. And you can see, and we'll talk about a little Live Alive, but once we talk about that, you'll kind of see, like, especially for Chrono Trigger and Chrono Cross, like, a lot of the similar ideas and similar mechanics and stuff work themselves into those later, better known, also very influential games.
More relevantly to us, the first title that Yoko Shimomura worked on at Square.
She had to recreate the music from scratch for the remake. Did you see that?
Yeah.
Because of course,
Yeah.
like anything Square did more than like 6 months ago just gets trashed.
I mean, I think especially back then. Yeah,
Nope,
but I think that
every
was the
6
case
months
with a lot of
clear
game
out all of
companies.
their files. It's just how it goes. They wipe the Dropbox.
Yeah, I do think the original release had the MIDI, like the beeps and boops soundtrack, whereas the remake does have orchestral arrangements.
She said it was very stressful though because some of the music is quite iconic.
Yes, it is.
She just had to listen to it and figure it out.
Yeah. I thought that was interesting that she had been on like working like in Street Fighter, and then this was her first project at Square.
Wanted to do some RPGs. Although this is definitely a funky little RPG.
Yes, it's a little short story collection, basically.
Stanley, you want to give people the rundown as the expert player here?
Sure. So Live Alive's a collection of 7 plus a couple short stories with different protagonists in different time periods. So there's a prehistory scenario, a Wild West scenario, Twilight of Edo Japan, modern day, ancient China, near future, and far future. As well as there is a Middle Ages chapter that unlocks after you do the other 7, and a final chapter that sort of brings everything together. So what's sort of unique about this is mostly each of the scenarios are entirely separate from each other. They share the basic battle system, where there's turn-based combat that takes place on like a small grid. But each of your characters have different fighting styles, and also each of the chapters have their own like special gimmicks to them. So they share the battle system, but not all of them use it the same way, essentially. So, for example, in Imperial China, a lot of it is training your disciples. So you choose which disciples you want to train and engage in battles with them, and that makes them stronger. In modern day, you're like trying to become the best martial artist. And so you fight a bunch of enemies in like a fighting game format. And by getting hit by certain moves, you then learn that move and can use it against other opponents.
I recall that one being one of your least favorite, if I'm remembering correctly.
I mean, I liked all of them except for Prehistory, which I liked parts of, but thought it wasn't great. So even if I was like, I think I put in my ranking, I put Modern Day 3rd from the bottom, but it's not because I disliked it. It's just because it had less going on, I thought, than some of the other ones. And some of them have basically no combat. Far Future only has a final boss fight, for example. But all of them are sort of connected by this particular thread. There's like an evil force in all of them that are like culminates in a boss fight, and you start to be like, this is sounding similar once you've done a couple of scenarios, and that sort of is what comes together in the end in the final chapter.
I wish I had thought when we were doing the mashup for Age of Empires and We Are OFK a few weeks ago to like try to structure it in this way, as opposed to it being like, we're going to find some historical buddies. It could have been buddies from throughout history coming together as buds.
I guess so, yeah.
Just came to me. I don't usually think about our mashups after we do them because I just try to put it out of my head. But I was listening to this, I was like, wait a second. I do want a game with George Washington and Cleopatra. I guess that's civilization, but whatever. But it sounds like the idea of this game was to kind of make like a Final Fantasy in miniature, sort of.
Yeah.
Like the idea was that the Final Fantasy series, which by the time Live Alive came out for the first time, 6 of them had come out, I think.
It was supposed to come out before Final Fantasy VI, but they ended up switching. Which probably hurt Live Alive in the end, because probably. 6 was pretty popular.
But the idea being, like, if Final Fantasy is a series where, like, you have these gigantic games that all sort of very loosely exist in some kind of narrative arc, emphasis on very loosely, right? Then Live Alive tells lots of very small stories within a single game that all serve one narrative arc. Yeah. So I thought that was kind of interesting to say, like, let's take this thing that we've been doing for like a decade and let's do it all in one game. Tiny.
Yeah, basically.
But it's an interesting subversion of the genre because, of course, like, JRPGs are very much known for being, like, very, very, very long. And Live Alive is both, like, not that long overall, I don't think. But
it's
of course,
not as long as a typical Final Fantasy, I believe.
Right. And also, each story, and you'll have to tell me if you felt like this was the case, but each story was designed to be...
I don't have a good sense of how long the early Final Fantasies are, to be
Sorry,
fair.
I wasn't talking about the early Final Fantasies. I was talking about the stories within Live Alive, but I think each one was designed to be sort of played in a day, or playable in a day.
Yeah, they definitely are. Some of them are longer than others, but yeah.
That was interesting. It's interesting that already in 1994, or in, the early 90s, people were like, no, like, JRPGs are too long. Let's
I don't
make
think it was quite that. I don't think that was quite the impulse, but
that was a joke, but still. It's kind of short story month to talk this, huh? Like, I feel like we are, not that this game and We Are OFK are anything alike, but like a little bit of a through line.
Yeah, a little bit.
I'm sort of surprised. I don't mean to say surprised that you like this game. I guess it's more that I'm surprised that you don't like Octopath Traveler, and so that colors my perception every time we talk about a game that's sort of like this. But it sounds like Octopath Traveler basically made this remake possible.
Well, I think Octopath Traveler is definitely what has popularized the HD 2D style. Mm-hmm. That has started, like, popping up in different Square Enix releases. And also because I believe Tokito was involved in Octopath Traveler to some extent. And he really liked the graphical style. And so decided to sort of take that to Live Alive. Which, HD 2D is like you have sprite art for the characters, but the backgrounds are all 3D and sort of pixely still, if that makes sense. So you can have like really good like lighting effects happening, but you still get the charm of like the sprites, for example.
In this day and age, is that easier than doing like a full... sprite art always to me seems like I realize that making all video games is impossible, but sprite art seems impossible in a way that I can understand why it's impossible.
I don't think it's easier or harder.
Diplomatic answer.
Depends on what you're doing. One thing the remake loses that I find sort of charming about the original is the, like, character art. Not, like, the sprites, because those all look the same, of course. But, like, the splash screen arts of characters. In the original, each of them was done by a different manga artist. Mm-hmm. So they all look significantly different from each other. A couple of them you can look at and be like, oh yeah, I see it. Because I think the Detective Conan manga artist did the Twilight of Edo Japan, and I looked at the picture for that and like the eyes, and I was like, oh yeah.
It's Conan.
Detective Conan eyes.
It's funny, I read that one of them was like going to do it more anime style. And they looked at the others, they were like, wait. Pull it back.
Other notable ones from when I was looking at, one, the prehistory guy is like a big nationalist, so that sucks. Yoshinori Kobayashi has had some bad things to say about comfort women.
So a real caveman.
Yeah. Yumi Tamura is the big shoujo manga artist. She did the Far Future ones. The Ryoji Minagawa did present day. He did Spriggan, which is a pretty notable series. I don't know a ton about it, but you can sort of tell the style by looking at it. And the other one, the near future was Kazuhiko Shimamoto, who had done a lot of Kamen Rider manga, which, considering that one's sort of tokusatsu inspired, makes sense as someone to pick for that one.
But they didn't have those people back, or they redid the art?
The art's all the same. It's similar. It's drawn by Naoki Ikushima, who I believe did I think they did the Middle Ages one. No, it wasn't. It was someone else. But no, they just have one character designer doing the character art for the remake.
Interesting.
I think it would have been a little bit neat if they had brought on like more like modern authors to do it. But I sort of get from like a marketing perspective why they want just a unified image. It might have looked too eclectic.
Well, it also sounded, it was interesting to me because you think about this with licensed music all the time, but I never would have thought about it with the character artists. But it seems like to do the Wii U re-release, they had to like get permission from all of those artists to use their work.
Yeah.
And Square owns whatever, like all of these artists like worked for one company, I think.
Yeah.
And Square owns that company now, which I think is another reason this remake was like possible. But I understand why
I believe they had connections with I think is it Shokugeki?
Yeah.
Maybe. Shogokukan. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Yes.
I don't know if they own it now, but Square does own manga magazines. So they could have pulled from their stock, I guess, if they wanted to. But
well, I understand why, having had that experience of like having to do, even if it was easy, right? Having to do some negotiation of like, we can include your character designs in this re-release on Wii U. I would understand.
And a manga artist doesn't necessarily like they might not be working for the same magazine anymore, for example. So
yeah. So it makes sense, but I agree. Like is kind of a neat thing, like a random neat thing. Like what a weird thing to decide to do at random for a game. I mean, it makes sense for this game because, of course, it's like distinct stories and like that's cool. But like, it is a little bit like, why did you make this hard on yourself like this? So I understand why in the modern remake world they would be like, no.
Yeah.
Let's not make this hard.
Yeah.
Should I play Live Alive?
I like it quite a lot. I mean, there's some ways that it's aged. The remake does add a few things. Like, the original does not have a map in any scenario, I believe. The Far Future gives you, like, a separate map, but these ones give you, like, a compass thing. So you can tell where you're supposed to go next.
That's nice.
Which I don't believe that the original had. So they've modernized it a little bit. There's definitely still some ways in which like you're like, oh yeah, this is an older game. But it's really charming. I really like it. The soundtrack is iconic. I keep getting it confused. The one in because I keep thinking of the Undertale track. The one in it's Megalomania, right?
It's something like that. I think it's not quite megalomania, but it's approximately that word.
Megalomania. Yeah.
I can't read.
And then there's an Undertale song that is inspired by it that is also called something like that I don't remember what it's called. But you can tell, like, looking at the Twilight of Edo Japan scenario especially, where you have, like, moral choices based, like, it's literally like you can kill a couple, or you can kill everyone, or you can do a pacifist route. You're like, oh yeah, Undertale.
There it is.
There it is.
I read that Tokita didn't want to have health bars.
Yeah. There's things that do this, like, that have, like, just try to have it shown on the sprite how damaged you are. I don't think it would have worked very well, though.
Like, we're going to talk more about it's games subverting genre conventions week, I guess. Here at Talk This a little bit. But man, I think that health bars are a good genre convention. I think they don't need to be subverted. That's my hot take. Yeah. Your game should have a health bar.
I think you should have something that's more of an indication than just, like, wear on the character model.
Because sometimes us character models just look worn, you know?
Sure, yeah.
It was hard. Was the remake a success? This was hard for me to judge because they were like 270,000 just in Japan, a failure. And then I saw 500,000 for the remake, and then I read further on it was like 500,000 for the remake, but 150,000 of those were in Japan. And I was like, wait a minute, that's less.
Well, less in Japan, yeah.
Right, but do you understand what I'm saying?
I think that this remake was targeted more for overseas.
Fair enough.
But yeah, I think that it did fine for what it is. I don't know. Who knows? Square will announce in, like, a year that it sucked. Because that's what they do with all of their games now. So, who knows?
At least they're putting them out there.
They're putting too many of them out there. They could stop putting games out there.
Well, it's a week where our two games could switch orders, you know?
It's not, actually.
It is, actually.
No. 2013.
Not if you talk about the original free mod for Half-Life 2, released in 2011.
That's cheating.
I just think it's funny. We've been having this a lot lately where it's like, oh, there's the game, but it's got it just had a sequel. And then there's the game that it's like, it's old, but it's new.
Well, the Stanley Parable Ultra Deluxe is a bit more than a remake than Live Alive. Live Alive does add some extra content in its remake, by the way. There's a new ending. So that's also there. And a new arrangement of Megalomania, which is, you know, always worth it.
You're telling me in Live Alive I can't have my cowboy just, like, run around with his horse? You're telling me in Live Alive my caveman doesn't wake up and go, it was all a dream?
What are you talking about?
I'm adding new content, but inspired by... I'm prepping my mashup already.
Okay. All right. No, you don't do any of those things. The cowboy does have a horse, but you don't ride it.
Well, what's the point of that?
You're, like, busy. You know, you're walking around. You're doing cowboy things.
Why
you're having
a
drink.
Around when you could be on a horse?
You can't take your horse into the tavern, Madelyn.
Yes, you can. Of course you can. You're a cowboy.
How would you get your drink?
Look, we all know that you can lead a horse to the tavern, but you can't make him drink.
It's not how the saying goes.
You can't make him. He's only going to drink if he wants to.
Okay.
Sorry, are you ready to move to the Stanley Parable? Do you have any other thoughts to share about Live Alive?
I think more games should be short story collections.
If you were going to make a short story collection game, or rather, if you were going to have added, like, one more time period to Live Alive, what would it have been?
I don't know, Madelyn. I don't know enough about history. It sort of covers a lot of the popular ones, so.
Fair enough. Feel like you could do it.
It's got the old America, it's got the old Europe, it's got the old China, it's got the old Japan. What else? What else do you want?
What
I guess old
Europe
Africa.
Oh, Middle Ages. I forgot it was Middle Ages.
Yeah.
It's out of order on my list.
Yeah.
We could have done like Mansa Musa.
Yeah, I guess so.
But it's a Square game that's not going to do Mansa Musa.
Well, yeah, not in the 90s.
I mean, we all read what they had to say about Final Fantasy 16, so don't think the Mansa Musa expansion is coming anytime soon.
I find that quote so weird because there is clearly like an Arabic-inspired country in Final Fantasy 16, so I just have no idea what he was talking about in general.
Well, speaking of having no idea what someone is talking about, I guess, I don't know, the Stanley Parable Ultra Deluxe Edition.
Yeah.
As Emma said, well, we can bicker about the release date here, but the game, the Stanley Parable, originally came to Steam in 2013 from Davey Redden. I looked up how to pronounce Live Alive. I didn't look up how to pronounce the name of
You didn't look up how to pronounce Live Alive.
Yes.
You asked me. I told you.
I looked it up by using a person.
Yeah, okay.
I hired a TaskRabbit.
Yeah.
But originally released on Steam by Davey Redden, and William Pugh. But was originally released as a free mod for Half-Life 2 in 2011, thus making it potentially eligible for old game status.
Yeah, by technicality.
Well, it reaches new game status in like a month, so give this to me.
Okay.
Anyway, in the Stanley Parable, the original Ultra Deluxe Edition, which is what we're actually talking about, came out in April. Was originally supposed to come out in 2019, and then didn't.
Yes.
But
it was originally just supposed to be a port to consoles, but that changed. And then, there was the coronavirus.
Oh, yeah, that.
Yeah, just that small little complication.
They can't re-release this game without messing with it, is what I've realized. Like, every time this game comes out, they're like, we've messed with it a little.
Yeah. They've messed with it a lot
yes.
in Ultra Deluxe, I should say.
Well, I just want everyone to know I beat the game. I got an ending, so game's over. It's pretty short.
You did? You played it?
Yeah, I would have played more, but I fell asleep on the couch. So
that's fine.
But that's fine. I beat the game.
Which ending did you get?
I thought I was having a dream. I followed the narrator. Okay, let me explain the Stanley Parable for those who may not be familiar first, and then I will talk about my experience. So in the Stanley Parable, you play as silent protagonist Stanley, but the game is not silent. You get narration constantly from a British narrator. What is it with games released right around this time and like interactive narrators?
What are you thinking of?
I'm thinking of Bastion.
Ah, yeah, that's fair.
That sort of fell out of fashion, even though everybody loved it in this and
it's
Bastion.
Hard. It's difficult. That's probably why.
What is that game? You know, the Greek gods, Breath of the Wild, that sort of has a little bit of that. From Bad Studio. Phoenix Rising.
Fennec Rising? Was it actually Phoenix, or was it like something like a name?
Well, it wasn't spelled like Phoenix, but it was...
Oh, right. It was Fenix.
Yeah.
Rising. Right.
I guess it had a little bit of that, but yeah, those early aughts, late 2010 or early 2010s. I'm sorry, late aughts, early 2010s. Big time for the interactive narrator device. Wonder what was up with that. But you are an office employee. You're just like a data entry monkey, basically. But you love being a data entry monkey. You love it. Stanley loves pressing buttons and entering data. But one day there's no data to enter. And so you have to walk around and you discover that there's nobody there.
Yeah. So you go to investigate what happened to your coworkers. Which
sounds like a really riveting... Like I've sold you on the game, if you haven't heard it, right? It's like, you're a data entry guy, and then there's no data.
There's like that new Severance on Apple TV, right? That's like workplace horror.
Severance is apparently actually literally inspired by the Stanley Parable.
I believe it, yeah.
Which is hilarious. Anyway, it's a game with a lot of choices, and as you go, the narrator kind of talks to you about your choices and tells you the choices that you make. So they're kind of like, you know,
he narrates you.
He does narrate you. So the first and sort of like, I won't say most infamous. Like, I think there's plenty of infamous choices in the Stanley Parable, but like the first and very emblematic choice is you're like walking out of your office and you're presented with 2 doors, and the narrator says that you go through one of the doors, and before you've done it, he's like, Stanley goes through
the door on the left.
The door on the left. But of course, you can go through the door on the right, even though the narrator has said you go through the door on the left. And so the story progresses accordingly, and the narrator reacts accordingly. So when I finished the game, and I beat the game, totally done with it, speed run, 10 minutes. I did do the first door. I did follow the narrator for the first door. I went through the left door. But then he told me to go see my boss, and I didn't. I went the other way. And so that meant that Stanley got trapped in a little loop, just walking from the same room to the same room to the same room, over and over again. And he thought it was a dream, so I could fly for a little bit. And then I realized it wasn't a dream, and I died.
Yeah.
And a woman found me on the sidewalk. A little unclear to me how she found me on the sidewalk, but that's okay.
Yeah.
And so I beat the game. Pretty good. It's on sale, so that like 10 minutes of content was worth the $15 or so I spent.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so the gimmick of Stanley Parable is like finding the different routes that you can go. So the narrator will tell you to do things, right? And you can either listen to him or not listen to him at various stages of progression. And that will lead you to various different endings, depending on what you do. And there's other like little things that you can do. Like you can go in the closet and I'll give you some stuff, even though it's not an ending, or you can interact with certain doors and that'll give you some stuff. So it's just about like poking at the game, and trying to find the different routes that you can take.
Which is itself, it sounds like it was quite a development challenge over the course of the different iterations of the game to make sure, like, it sounds like in the like original mod version that there was like a flow chart at the beginning that was like, here's where you go, basically. And that ultimately in like testing that, they found that like players didn't love that. But if they just got rid of the flow chart, people couldn't figure out where to go. So they had to like balance, you know, being able to identify where those divergences took place. Otherwise, you might not ever find the secret ending.
Well, what secret ending?
I don't mean the secret ending. You just might not ever find like ending 10 of 12 or something like that.
Yeah. Yes.
Although I wouldn't put it past them. I wouldn't put it past them that, like, there's some kind of secret ending if you walk around for, like, a specific number of minutes that a new door appears.
Maybe.
Feels like something that would happen in this game.
So Ultra Deluxe adds over double the amount of content that the original had. So it's sort of a remake, it is sort of a sequel, and it's sort of about that. It's sort of about its status as a remake and a sequel.
So, for context, the original Stanley Parable was like a really big success of the early Steam era.
Yes.
Both in terms of, like, I think it sold quite well, but also just like a huge critical success.
Yeah.
Did you check the Wikipedia Greatest Games of All Time list? It's gotta be
Neither of these are on the Wikipedia Greatest Game of All Time list.
Kind of shocked that the Stanley Parable isn't on there.
Yeah.
But
I get Live Alive because I honestly don't think that Wikipedia's list is concerned with, like, unlocalized games.
Yeah.
Based on its criteria. But I was surprised that Stanley Parable wasn't on there.
Because it got, like, absolutely glowing. Again, it came out in this era this is not to ding the Stanley Parable, like, it's doing cool things and it's asking cool questions, but it came out during this, like, early Steam era where it's like, wow, if your game knows it's a game, like, groundbreaking. And it is groundbreaking, but it's like, now it's like, oh, okay, like, games know that they're games all the time. I mean, it's still like, there's a lot of commentary happening on, like, what a game is and, like, how gaming narratives work, but even more of a, like, powerful thing to point out in the early 2010s than it would be if you made a game like this now.
Yes.
So, like, basically, like, they, like, the guy who made this game was, like, a total amateur.
Yes.
More or less.
Yeah.
And, like, just the goal was just to be able to mess with the player's head as much as possible. And to kind of, like, the kind of, like, well, why can't my character just, like, sit down and do nothing? Like, why can't my character, like, go through this other door instead of going through the one they're supposed to go through? Like, those kinds of, I don't know, those, like, easy gaming, like, questions. It kind of asked in game form. Do you know why they decided to remake it? Was it just that, like, they were going to bring it to consoles?
I think, the original idea is just that they were going to bring it to consoles. And I believe they were also going to update the engine, which they did, which apparently caused them more problems than they expected. Because they were using I believe the Source engine, but specifically, like, the Portal branch. So they were using, like, the Portal system.
Yeah.
To do their, like, mapping. So when you seems like you're going through, like, seamless hallways, in a lot of cases you're actually, like, teleporting to a completely new area. But that's not built into the Unity engine the way it is in, like, the Portal branch of Valve's engine, right? So it caused a lot of problems of trying to remake things that worked the same way. And still felt seamless, right? If there was, like, frame drops in certain areas or something didn't fit together right from certain angles, like, that would break the illusion too much of, like, a standard office space. So apparently that gave them some trouble. And then they were just like, what if we just added some stuff? There's some stuff that I think they were planning to always update. Like, in the original, there's a section where you're, like, there's, like, game references, like, you're dropped into different games. And I think that they always wanted to, like, update those, which also apparently was difficult.
Yeah.
It's a lot of, like, wow, this seems like it was more difficult than they thought it was. And perhaps in that, like, oh, this is more difficult than we thought, they were like, but what if we did more stuff? Which I think is a very real impulse of game development. And they ended up adding quite a lot of stuff to Ultra Deluxe. Yeah.
Well, notably, this is pretty much exactly what happened when they were moving from the mod to the 2013 release as well. He was originally like, I just want to remake the mod, like, in a way that, like, stands on its own. Mm-hmm. And then it was like, wait a minute, no, let's add more.
Yeah.
So it seems like a personality thing at play here.
Yeah. So yeah, some spoilers for Stanley Parable Ultra Deluxe. But the main thrust that kicks off the new content is the narrator gets frustrated by, like, the Ultra Deluxe label. It's like, this is not enough new content. I want my content. And he gets, like, obsessed with, like, the original release of the Stanley Parable as well. You go into his memory zone where, like, he looks through, like, his fond memories of the Stanley Parable. Only then he finds the Steam reviews. Or if you're playing on console, or you're playing not on Steam, the pressurized gas reviews, of course. And gets, like, disillusioned with, like, his memory of the original Stanley Parable, like, his pristine vision of that game. and decides it's time for the Stanley Parable 2. And then you play the Stanley Parable 2. After learning about all of its new features, of course. So the main part of the Stanley Parable 2 is there's balloons now.
Oh,
and
cool.
also, each ending has an alternate version based on whether or not you pick up, like, the support bucket at the beginning. So one of the new features is just you can hold a bucket and it brings you comfort. And so then you can go through the game holding the bucket, and each of the endings is either markedly different or slightly different in order to deal with the fact that you now are Stanley and the bucket.
Right. This game is so weird.
The bucket endings are wild. Like, the endings of the Stanley Parable can get pretty wild on their own.
Yeah.
But some of the bucket endings are like, what is this? What's happening?
What do you think? So, like, the Stanley Parable was like, here's how I make fun of gaming storytelling in 2013. And they're still iterating on that. What's the
I don't think it's quite fair to say that the Stanley Parable makes fun of game storytelling. That's semantically, I'm being very semantic here. That feels like it's not a very mean-spirited game. I
agree.
Say.
Poke holes in, maybe.
Sure.
How would you poke holes in 2022 gaming narratives? I guess the support bucket is that, because you have a son now.
I didn't think about that. That's true. It is very much like you have your son now. You must take care of the bucket. I think it's more, it's more concerned with, like, sequels, this new one. It, like, being, like, too... There's, going through the sequel stuff, it's very funny. You can find, like, a list of, like, people love sequels, and it's just, like, all these, the 2, Aladdin 2, Return of Jafar, Dark Souls 2. And just, like, how it's about, like, having content as well is sort of how they're tackling it. Like, the idea of, like, I need more content. It's just, the narrator seems to be a little bit obsessed with. But yeah, I don't know. It's just, it's a delightful little thing, the different features that you can have. There's a fun part where, like, you know, they're like, here's our new feature, the infinite hole, you know? And it's in fact not infinite. If you fall long enough, you hit the bottom, and the narrator's very disappointed in you for ruining the illusion. Which I guess you could take as, like, you know, yes, if you look at something too closely in a game, you will find that it is in fact not that.
Yeah.
Which I do think there is an impulse for a lot of gamers to do, you know?
Yeah.
But I didn't make the Stanley Parable, Mel, and I'm not a very clever person, so I don't know how it would attack gaming storytelling.
Emma puts herself down on the podcast. Secretly, she knows she is a clever person.
Do you know what I mean? Do you know what I'm saying, though, by clever?
Madeline knows what Emma means. But
you're not being very clever.
I'm sorry. I am not being very clever right now. No, I get it. I do. Did you play this game, or did you just, like, watch a bunch of it?
I played the original Stanley Parable. I watched people play the Ultra Deluxe stuff.
I feel like they had a lot of fun Twitter stuff going on when it came out, too.
Yeah. Yeah, they're very active in stuff. I watched, I think they've done 2 Boundary Break episodes on it, for example, on, like, the original and the Ultra Deluxe, and they've had the narrator on both times, I believe.
That's fun.
One really remarkable thing about Ultra Deluxe is the audio mixing. If you really listen, you can tell that he's older in the new recordings. But you have to be, like, really listening for it. Like the way that the audio quality is pretty much indistinguishable from the original audio. Which apparently the original audio was recorded like over 2 years anyway.
Yeah.
But he is obviously Kevin Brighting is like, you know, almost a decade older than he was when the original Stanley Parable came out. But he's managed to hit the same tone that he'd originally had. It's very impressive, I think.
That's like an easy to overlook thing, I think.
Yeah.
Well, are you ready to mash?
Yes. You have to remind me, there's one ending where the narrator is trying to figure out how to tell a joke. And there is a really helpful, informative video on how to tell a joke within the game, like an informational video that you should remind me to send you when we're done recording.
I don't need that video. I don't know what you're talking about.
There's essential steps that you skip when it comes to the
Here's
telling
how you
of
tell
a joke.
You think about the names of the 2 games on the podcast. First, you consider whether there's a way to mash those 2 names together. If there is, you create a sentence that allows you to say that mashed up 2 names. The reason I do that, by the way, it's thematic. You know what we do at the end of the podcast? We mash the games together. So when I mash the titles,
but you don't end your joke.
It's thematically relevant.
You don't end your joke with, I'm done with the funny. So it's not a complete or proper joke.
I don't know what you're saying. I say that after every joke and you edit it out every single week. Every week I go, I'm done with the funny, and you go, I'm going to cut that. And I go, no, you're not. Otherwise I'm going to sound like I'm not funny. And then you do, and there's nothing I can do about it.
The listeners will have to choose which of us to trust.
Okay. So the mashup has got to be, you know, concerned with calling attention to or subverting gaming tropes of some kind. And it's got to have multiple endings. Live Alive's got multiple endings. Stanley Parable obviously has multiple endings.
Yes.
So you're an office worker at different times in history?
Yeah. There's something amusing there. People love, you know, when, like, hell is like an office, right?
Yeah.
So we'll just be like, you know, the Wild West, it was just like an office.
No, I feel like you could either make it's like you're a peasant in earlier times, but I feel like there are ways it's like, there was a bureaucracy. Like, bureaucracy was developed, you know, quite early on in history. So I feel like, you know, there are ways to be like, oh man, the Pharaoh messing up my spreadsheets. Like that kind of vibe.
Yeah, you could do something like, I wonder if you could do something with, like, the evolution of bureaucracy. Like, you start in, like, the earliest thing, and, like, your actions in that time, like, affect the next timeline, and then it branches out further from there until you reach modern day, and it's, like, nothing like actual office work anymore.
I like the idea of that. The multitude of branching paths that would be possible sounds like a nightmare.
Yes.
But it sounds cool.
Yeah, I'm not denying that it would be indeed quite a nightmare, but that's the initial idea I've got.
But, like, what's the culmination of that? Like, what's the climax of that game?
Eventually, like, you find, like, real office work, and it's, like, a hollow victory, because now you've, like, doomed everyone in modern day of, like, instead of, like, playing with thousands of bouncy balls or, like, hanging out with, like, pet lizards, they're just sitting there doing their paperwork. And you're like, well, I found the right timeline, but at what cost, you know?
That's okay, so the purpose of the game is to make the right choices so that you create true office work.
Yeah.
Nice. This has the right energy. I think it would be a bad game, but it has the right energy.
That's fair. My initial thought was, like, you could just make a more complicated Stanley Parable of, like, you have like 3 office workers, and like you make choices as each of them, and that affects like the stories that happen when you're playing the other ones. So
That'd be kind of dope as a multiplayer game. I'm not gonna lie.
You go in like a clockwise thing, and you get different endings based on both on your own actions and the other character's actions.
Again, though, you're just creating, like, the Stanley Parable seems hard enough.
Yeah, I'm just making harder Stanley Parable.
You're just like,
yes,
how can I make this game even more difficult to make? But it's hard, you know. What we didn't really talk about with Stanley Parable is it's mechanically incredibly simple, and that's always hard for us when we're doing mashups, right? Because like the key element of a good mashup is that like you can take the mechanics from one game and kind of the setup from the other.
Yes,
and
the Stanley Parable
a good one.
Is indeed a walking simulator,
which is good because I played it on my Mac. Played on my Mac, available for Mac. Shout out.
Yeah.
Can't really do much more than walk on my Mac, I'm not gonna lie. And I tried to walk with the arrow keys first. I'll expose myself.
Does that not work?
No, you have to use WASD.
Wow.
Or you could, if you want to get even sort of like more meta, you could be like game creators throughout history.
Mm-hmm.
It's like you're in Egypt or you're in like Rome inventing chariot racing, and you're inventing playing video games, and you're inventing baseball. Like, I don't know. I don't really think that's any different or better than the office workers, but these are very difficult to mash up.
Yeah.
I guess you could do the Stanley Parable, but like pick any of the timelines. Like, it could just be like 8 mini Stanley Parables. What?
There's something inherently funny about that, but
like, and your name is Stanley, and like, or whatever the name it is we pick, right? Your name is that in all of them, but you're a caveman, you're cowboy, you're a medieval peasant, whatever. Like, we'll pick 8 timelines.
That is appropriate with Live Alive too, since you have ODO in every timeline of that one. So,
I mean, necessarily you'd have to have fewer endings than the Stanley Parable.
Oh man, I forgot. Sorry, that just reminded me of thinking about in every timeline. I forgot about the weird running gag in Live Alive, where in every timeline,
there's
you can find the father dies and leaves his son alone. There's just like the same. There's always like an orphan child whose father dies within the story in different ways.
See, I feel like you could do this. I feel like you could do like a Stanley Parable, and then in the end, all the endings that you get in each of those little things kind of tally up into a here's how it affected history.
Yeah, ending. Sure. Yeah.
But I still am attached to the history, the office workers of history one. Feel like there's something to it. And you can even do like the kind of different genre, not that Live Alive is doing like genre pastiches, right? But like the different mechanics, right? I feel like there could be one that was very like 2 Point Hospital kind of mechanics.
Well, I mean, they're not doing game genre pastiches, but the Live Alive short stories are kind of like movie, the way we talk about movie TV genre pastiches. Yeah. So,
but I feel like there are different management sim things you could spoof.
Yeah.
One of them it probably could be a fighting game for one of like the earlier ones, like probably bureaucracy, like in the Huns or whatever, like would be like punching people, the Mongols, I guess.
We would have to do some historical research here, I think.
Yes, you're right to say that it's not based on anything other than like the Mongols being like conquerors. That's all. But like I feel like you could like work in different mechanics being at the core of your office life.
Yeah.
All right. Well, that's what I've got to offer on the mashup. Listeners, thanks for tuning in for another episode of Talk This.
It's dangerous to podcast alone.
If you like the show, right now you're subscribing on the podcast platform of your choice. I can see you doing it, listener. You're clicking over to Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, TuneIn, Spotify, Pandora Podcasts Online in the app, Overcast, Pocket Cast, anywhere that you can find podcasts, and you are subscribing to Talk This. You might also be navigating to our website, www.talkthispodcast.com, where you can read all about the show, where you're reading all about the show. You're checking out the games in the hat that Emma is going to pull from in a minute. You're reading our blog, maybe even long-running series Clickbait Boyfriend and Split Screen. And after that, you're subscribing to us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube at Talk This Podcast.
Twitter does indeed still exist so far.
Probably.
Yep.
So, Emma, next week, is it my side quest already? Right.
Yep. Your side quest.
Games for dreary early December.
I'm ready. I'm ready for it.
That'll be something else. But what are we talking about in 2 weeks?
For our old game, we are talking about Sleeping Dogs.
Cool.
And for our new game, we are talking about Cult of the Lamb.
Isn't it just Cult of Lamb?
Is it?
Isn't it?
It's the cult with the lamb in it.
Lamb Cult.
The cult lamb.
So a very animal-themed podcast. It's good. Yes. I've been wanting to play Cult of parentheses the Lamb. So
yeah. I don't think there are that many actual dogs in Sleeping Dogs, I should say.
I don't know what you're talking about. Of course, the game is called Sleeping Dogs.
You're right. It's just about watching dogs sleep.
It's a Nintendo spinoff. Well, listeners, thanks for tuning in for the show. I hope you had a great Thanksgiving. Emma, do you have a sign off?
This week, I hope that you make the right choices.